Understanding where we come from, our identity, and role in society is an integral part of the human experience. But not everyone finds a strong, supportive community. After all, it is community that helps overcome challenges of circumstance leading to success in life. The Brotherhood Sister Sol Brosis is a not for profit organization dedicated to developing youth into empowered critical thinkers and community leaders. It is where young people claim the power of their history, their identity, and community to build the future they want to see. I have on Chizuba Talks today Khary Lazzare-White of this organization. Khary was born and raised in New York City. He is a social entrepreneur, a novelist, an educator, activist, and civil rights lawyer whose work centers on the intersection of race, class, gender, education, organizing, and the law. Kari has extensive experience as a speaker across the country and has written opinion pieces and essays for publications that include the Huffington Post, Nation Books, Essence Magazine, MSNBC, and New York University Press. His first novel, Passage, has been reviewed widely and named among the best new fiction by the Wall Street Journal, the paperback edition of which was released in January of 2019. Welcome to the podcast, Kari.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Kari, for more than 25 years, the Brotherhood Sister Sol has been at the forefront of social justice, challenging inequity and championing opportunity for all. Can you tell us about the founding vision and how it has evolved over the years?
I co-founded the Brotherhood Sister Sol with my childhood friend. We had grown up together in New York City and went off to college in the 1990s together. We both came from families filled with activists and artists, people who worked in government, people who sought social change outside of government, people who were involved in the civil rights movement, the black movement for freedom in the United States, the women's movement, the labor movement. Um, it's kind of what birthed us. And I think we always knew that we wanted to be involved in structural change and the efforts to make our world a more equitable world, a more just world. And so Jason and I, Jason Warwin, my co-founder, we decided to start an organization that was called the Brotherhood. Initially, it served young men in Harlem and New York City. It was in response to the city of New York, a city of roughly 9 million people, in terms of its residents, that each year at that time was experiencing over 2,000 murders a year. Violence was rampant. Um, Miss and poor education in our schools was rampant. Lack of employment opportunities was rampant. And we felt even if just a small step, that we would do something to respond to that kind of inequity. And we saw ourselves as a part of the continuation of the long freedom and justice movements that I mentioned our families worked in. So we saw ourselves as part of that continuum, and we felt like we had to do something.
Right. And you feel has the scene changed anything for the better today?
I think that in any movements for social justice, you have to be a realistic optimist. You have to see the structural changes that have occurred. You have to see the increased opportunity that is present. You have to see that we certainly have a city in New York City that has greatly decreased the amount of violence that young people have to face every day, and also recognize how much has remained the same. We still live in a deeply inequitable society for women, for Black people, for brown people, for immigrants. Um, these are very difficult times for many people, and so much of what we faced. New York City has a public school system of 1 million children. Only
Hmm.
70% graduate. So that means 300,000 children are not graduating. And of those who graduate, only 1 out of 3 graduates ready for college without remedial support. So in the United States, deemed one of the wealthiest nations in the world's history in New York City, such a wealthy city, that we still allow that we still allow 1 out of 3 New Yorkers to live in poverty or near the poverty line, is a reflection, I think, of still deep standing inequity and inequality that we continue to push back on and fight against. So there have certainly been changes and improvements due to many, many, many people struggling for more equity and more justice. But we still live in a deeply inequitable country.
Right. And could you tell us a little bit about your programs? What is the age group? I think you work from 8 years old to 22 years old, correct? The youths.
Yeah, so we work with young people. We are a nonprofit social justice youth development organization, and we work at the intersection of educating, organizing, and training. So our educating work is to help young people define a moral and ethical code. What does it mean to be men and women, leaders,
Hmm.
brothers and sisters in their community? What does it mean to declare that you want to be involved in, fighting and pushing for, yes, equity and justice or environmental reform and, pushing back on the issues of global warming that we see? Or is it working on a really micro level to improve your community? What does it mean to kind of be a leader in your space? And we provide lots of access and opportunity. It's workforce development, it's college guidance, it's environmental programming and arts educating. It's taking young people to see colleges and universities so they can pursue higher learning. It's having them study internationally in places like Ghana and Brazil. Um, so it's really holistic wraparound support services for young people that includes legal representation and mental health support. Just last year in the United States, the U.S. Surgeon General released a report that there was a mental health crisis for young people, much of it coming on the heels of
Yes.
the COVID pandemic. That's across economic and racial strata. And so, we knew that we had to respond to that and help young people to heal from this global pandemic that for adults was quite difficult, but for young people was absolutely traumatic as they lost 2 years of social and emotional development. So we educate, then we organize for structural change. We're involved in issues of racial justice, gender justice, and class justice. So we are working to increase mental health providers in our schools. We are working to bring some semblance of justice to the criminal justice system, and we are involved in areas of helping young people identify the very small but important ways that they can affect improving the environment and working to educate their peers on what environmental justice does look like. And so there are an array of ways that we organize. And then the third and final area is that we train. We train people on our model all across the country and internationally. We've trained about 3,000 educators from 300 organizations around the United States and in other countries. We have formal programming based on our model as far as Brazil and Bermuda, and then throughout the United States and Washington, D.C., and Boston and other places. So we're trying to train the field to implement our model in other parts of the country and internationally as well.
Wonderful. That sounds very comprehensive. You're taking care of every aspect of training and education. How is your program received by the young people?
I think young people love the program because our approach and our kind of educational pedagogy at its core is about putting young people front and center. It's about not just being didactic and talking down to young people, but really creating a space where young
Hmm.
people can claim their own education and find what interests them most and what allows them to develop intellectually the most. It's about instilling in them a love of learning. I think when you look at movements all around the world, young people were at the front of social movements throughout every generation of the last
Indeed.
century and the current century. And so often we forget that. And so we keep talking to young people as if we have all the answers and they have none of the answers. When, of course, so many young
Yeah.
people have very, very profound answers. And so our whole educational approach is yes, we're going to bring information and bring knowledge. And there is a time where we will do, more traditional teaching. But we're also going to create educational circles where young people can learn from one another, can inform each other, and sometimes can also inform us as the educators ourselves.
Wonderful. So you do listen to what the young people have to say, and feedback is very important.
Yeah, it's critically important. I mean, I think the best form of education is one that is a dialogue as opposed to a monologue. It's about really being in conversation. And I think when many of us reflect back to the brilliant teachers we might have had in our life, these would be educators who would kind of light a fire within us, often
Yeah,
answer a
true.
question with a question, often point us down the path. It's a beautiful quote by Ella Baker: give people light and they will find their way. It's not always about taking them where they need to go, but instead just illuminating and creating possibilities. And so I think, it's about creating really a conversation with young people where we understand what's most important to them. And we try to form a curricula and a pedagogy that allows them to develop.
So, are these after-school programs, or are these, month-long or year-long programs where you have a membership and then you include them in some kind of activity?
So our work, we engage with young people during the after school hours and over weekends. During the summer, it's all day. But yes, it's after school during the school year. So we essentially have two different seasons. During the school year, it's after school hours and weekends. And during the summer, it's all day. We provide breakfast and lunch over the summer, hundreds of meals for young people, provide after school meals during the school based calendar. We do have programs that are even more hours than that. So, for instance, our young people just came back from a month in Ghana. So, obviously, that was a 30 days international study program where they spent 6 months in the
Wow.
United States researching the culture, politics, and history of Ghana, and then go with us for a month to Ghana for deep exchange programs with Ghanaian artistic organizations, youth organizations. They meet with government officials and ambassadors. They stay at university. And this is about developing global awareness. I mean, I think there's a great lack of international awareness by Americans of all kind of backgrounds. It's a real shortcoming of the United States, and so many people from other nations really are connected in a global way, speak multiple languages,
Mm,
cross
mm.
borders more often. The United States can be a deeply insular nation. And so that's, again, of all economic background, but especially for low income young people, they also often don't have the access to travel. And so what we hope is that when young
Right.
people who are coming from a low income background graduate from our program and they've spent a month in Ghana, a month in Brazil, a month in South Africa, a month in Dominican Republic, um, they are experiencing the diversity of the world. They are seeing that the majority of the world is black and brown. They are seeing the complexity of the world, that there are no easy answers out there or easy solutions, but that certainly whatever answers and solutions there are will come from, I think, an international perspective and a global perspective.
Let's take a break to understand what Chizuba is. Everyone at some point ponders on how this beautiful life can be made more meaningful. Maybe you're a leader trying to enhance your employees' experience at your organization. Or you already work for the community and seek volunteers with state of the art skills to strengthen your nonprofit. Whatever your situation, know that you can make a difference. Chizuba began with this very vision, a vision to facilitate every skill and every passion in the world in meeting a social need. Corporate volunteering has several benefits for both businesses and organizations. In parallel, experienced and enthusiastic volunteers join NGO workers, enabling them to serve the community more effectively. Chizuba offers everyone looking to add purpose and meaning to their lives a chance to connect or volunteer virtually with nonprofit organizations from over 100 countries around the world. Visit www.chizuba.net and explore opportunities to find meaning. Chizuba, your platform to do good. And now, back with our guest. That's wonderful. I'm very surprised to know that it is a month long exchange. That's quite a long duration. It must come with this set of challenges.
I think we go to the same countries repeatedly for two reasons. One, because we've chosen countries that reflect the African diaspora, so Ghana with its history of Pan Africanism, Brazil being the largest recipient of the transatlantic slave trade, and human people moved from the west coast and also the east coast of Africa to the quote Americas. The largest population was moved to Brazil, and so Brazil is one of the largest black populations in the world. Um, Ghana obviously is a center of Pan Africanism. We take young people also to, as I've mentioned, Dominican Republic, also to Cuba. So now you're talking about the languages of Portuguese and of English. We've taken young people to Haiti, and so you have Spanish and French. So the diversity of that experience is complex. Moving through countries for a month is complex. Young people, some of whom have never left New York City, being in another country for a month is complex. But the reason we have the same countries we return to, in addition to the historical significance, is that we have longstanding partners in these places. And so uh, those
So, like
partners
host families,
really
you
help.
have host
Well,
families. Oh,
it's
okay.
less host families and more guides, and so
Okay.
our young people are staying with us in these different places, but we are returning to similar communities and similar towns.
Wonderful. I read something on your website about this wraparound programming. Could you throw some light on that?
So my wraparound programming, some of that's what I've touched on already, but in more depth, it means that young people's issues, young people's questions, don't contain themselves to a few hours a day. They may need support 24/7. So they have access to different staff 24/7. They have access to mental
Hmm.
health providers and social workers. They have access to lawyers. They have access to emergency intervention services because those are things that can come up. From wraparound, we mean that if a young person comes here and is dealing with a housing crisis, we will provide support. If they need college scholarships, we will provide support. It's not always that it's our resources, but it's maybe connecting that young person to additional external resources. And again, sometimes the difference, a young person who seen as a success that come from a low income family. They graduate from high school, they get into college, and so many people say, oh, well, they're now on the right path. We know that there's a real issue with retention in college for low income young people, and often that's very small economic interventions. They lose a small piece of their scholarship, or they don't have money for books, or there's a housing crisis, or the things that an upper middle class family can respond to immediately. We seek to respond to for our young people so that they are held and supported and guided and loved and get the support that they need.
Wonderful. Um, would you say there is a lack of discipline in the youth today? Is it something that is a big challenge?
I don't know that I think young people have a lack of discipline today. I think that each generation of young people face different challenges. I think that broadly, society has a lack of discipline these days. I think that the incredible increase in technology and social media and distractions have made us as a society one that does not focus enough on solutions, on difficult questions. It's a lot harder to find people who are struggling with the complexity of solutions now. Sometimes I say, who's going to write all of our poetry? If every single moment you have your earphones plugged in, or you're on a social media site, or you're swiping, like when are you doing your creative work? You have to
Hmm.
kind of separate yourself from that intensity of inundation of information. And so I think that's a struggle for all of society. I think young people face it, but who among us has not walked into a restaurant and seen people sitting at dinner with each other and they're all looking at their phones? That's not just young people, that's adults as well. So I think that there's a massive distraction issue right now that is not just about young people. Certainly, some teenagers can be even deeper into that than others. They can be attached to their phone, but many adults struggle with that as well. So I think that with young people right now, it's also that they rightfully are quite upset and confused about the world that they've inherited, that multiple generations have not reflected on and countered the real crises of our time. And I think the environment would be one example of that, where I think we've allowed things to get so out of control that people wonder if there's a way to really restore our earth and restore the existential threat to our world that is global warming. And so I think a lot of young people, how do you wrap your arms around that? And I think that there's a real disconnect for young people because they feel that so many adults are not struggling to find solutions.
Uh, Khary, tell me, how is it difficult to find educators or instructors that align with your ideology, or wanting what you want to be imparted?
Yes, in a word. But we have a very intensive hiring process and extensive search process to find those people. About half of our full time youth development staff are alum of the organization. So these are folks who have gone off to college and university and returned to educate the next generation because they see this as, family and a continuum of work that we did with
Give
them.
back, yes.
And
Mm.
so that's critically important. And we're also looking to professionalize the field. I think a lot of times in education, there are countries that really celebrate education. In Korea, I've been told that the translation of the word teacher is nation builder. The United States is not a country that has celebrated its educators and its youth development workers. It's seen as either a transient profession that you're in for a few years before you move on to, quote, your real career, or so many teachers and educators, and there's certainly bad ones out there, but there are many good ones, are not celebrated, compensated, and supported in the ways that they should be. So, as a nation, the United States, again, has really fallen behind so many other nations in terms of its educational system. And I think some of that's about how we treat those that we entrust the education of our young people to.
Right. So being an educator should be the first priority, not something that somebody has to fall back on, right? So unfortunately, that happens
Absolutely.
in most countries.
Yeah.
Zachary, on a parting note, tell us what are your long-term goals for this organization, the Brotherhood Sister Soul, and how do you envision the impact in the future? Also, if you could mention a couple of success stories or some incident that you really feel that has made this worthwhile.
So we just recently concluded building a 22,000 square foot building in Harlem, which is the center of our activity. While we work across New York City and across the state of New York, and as I've mentioned earlier, train people across the nation and also even work globally, our center is the community of Harlem. And so we're very excited to have built this groundbreaking building that's about the enlightenment of children. It's a beautiful space. It celebrates them as young people, it celebrates their education and their culture. It's a place that holds and protects young people. That was the big step for us to build that. I think what we see next is really an expansion of our organizing and our training work. We want to help more people to do similar work as we do, to teach them the pedagogy that we've developed. And we want to organize more expansively and deeply for structural change. I mean, I think there's so many issues, as you asked earlier in this interview, about what has changed and what hasn't changed. So many of them are, really multi-generational struggles. And I think as the United States and the face of the United States is changing, as the city of New York is always evolving and changing, we need to make sure that we are working each and every day for a more just, more equitable world. It's a huge undertaking. It's not that we will achieve it, but we will be participating in that effort. And, that's the future of Brotherhood Sister Soul. When I think of success stories, I just think of all of the countless young people who have gone through this program. And even if faced with really deep and um, difficult odds, have become successful adults, mothers and fathers to the next generation. We have some folks whose children are now in our program. So, two generations that have gone through the program since we started in 1995. I mentioned the beauty of alum coming back to work here, not momentarily, but we have folks who have worked here 15, 18 years. This is their career, this is their work. And to watch these brilliant educators, these gentle and loving adults who are supporting the next generation to develop into strong young people, that's the work that's inspiring. That's the work that's each and every day, I think, allows us to keep going, keep moving, keep pushing forward.
Wonderful. I did say last question, but then I also want to ask you, uh, how do you think educators or parents should impart education? Or basically, children are great observers, isn't it? So, how do you think is what is the best way to teach children?
I think we all have to look at education as a multifaceted, all inclusive thing. I think too often people say, well, now it's time to go to school, or now it's
Hmm.
time to learn. Even in your question, I think you framed it correctly, right? Young people are always watching, they're always observing. How do you speak to each
True.
other within your home? I know that for me, it was a huge gift and lesson that I didn't think of as a child, but as I've become older and seen it not occur in other families, the fact that every single night with two hardworking parents, my father worked in government, my mother was a teacher and a writer, every single night we sat down around the dinner table together as a family, talked about our day, talked about the world. What did that teach me? It taught me that children are important, even with busy, intense careers. My parents were there every night for dinner. It taught me that our voices mattered because it wasn't a household where children were seen and not heard. We were asked about our days. We were asked and expected to contribute to conversations as we sat around the dinner table each night. So that wasn't my school day, but it was certainly one of the more profound aspects of my education. Everything we do with young people, they learn, they see, they are educated by. And I think as parents, it's a massive undertaking, but parents must understand that children are always watching, and how you deal with your child will inform and form them for their life.
Wonderful, great advice. Thank you, Kari, for being on this podcast. It was really an honor talking to you. For would you like to tell us about your social media handles so people who are listening to
Sure,
this podcast might visit
sure.
your
You can
website?
you can follow Brotherhood Sister Soul at our website is www.brotherhood-sistersol.org. You can find us on Twitter, Threads, and IG at BroSis512. And you can follow me at KLW Speaks on Twitter and KLWCs on IG.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me and for this conversation. I appreciate it.